Those who don't know me, I'm Martin Knapp. I'm Director of the School for Social Care Research, and I'm delighted to welcome you here. This is the 7th annual conference of the School for Social Care Research, and I recognise some of you as recidivists, and some of you I don't recognise, so you're probably delightful ingenue or some suitable description. Anyway, so if you've been here before or haven't been here before, welcome. And we have a packed agenda as usual. And my purpose for these first few comments is just to welcome you and say just a little bit about what SSCR has been up to, but I'm very conscious that we have 3 minutes till our first plenary speaker. So, what has SSCR been up to? As you will remember, we had a first phase of 5 years, and in that period, I think we did about 67 studies that are completed, so it's research studies, around about 25 methods reviews and scoping reviews, trying to improve capacity within the field, trying to bring together evidence to tell us what's known before we go into the task of doing new evidence building. And then in phase 2, which started in May 2014, so far we've commissioned 22 new research studies, and we are now starting also to commission some methods and scoping reviews. So that's the kind of the research activity. We're also doing lots of what you would now call knowledge exchange and impact work, synthesizing, disseminating, communicating the findings from the evidence, which is clearly a very important part of what we do. One or two things quickly to announce. We have a new call out. It's not for research projects as such. It's to build capacity in the adult social care research field. So these are, if you go to the website, you will see the details. Deadline, I think, is the 9th of May. Anyway, yes, 9th of May. Awards are up to £20,000. This is to allow people to invest in skills to allow them to be a long-term researcher in the adult social care field. It's not only targeted at early career researchers, but clearly those are people we would like to encourage. And we'll have another call later in the year which will focus on practitioners. A little bit about housekeeping for the day before I hand over to our first speaker. We're not expecting a fire alarm test, so any fire alarm is real. You can see the exit signs. Most of you will have found the loos. All of you found coffee. In fact, I had to prize some of you from your cups to get you here, so you know where the meals will be. If you haven't been in here before, this is a lovely building, and there's some very interesting, if slightly gruesome, exhibits, depending if you're maybe a natural scientist or a social scientist. As a social scientist, I find them slightly gruesome, but interesting. So wander around if you get a chance. It is a very interesting building. We normally hold the conference in LSE. We haven't been able to this year because, again, this is just for your further information, large parts of LSE are being demolished. The ref results were so bad, we just had to bring them down. This is competition, you know, that's what happens. So lots of demolition going on, new building going up, so certain routes you might be familiar with to get to the Tube, for example, at Temple, are closed off at the moment, so just be aware of that as you find your way around. And then my final words will be just to remind you of the mission of the School for Social Care Research, and I quote, to develop the evidence base for adult social care practice in England by commissioning and conducting world-class research. And there are some key elements in that. Evidence, adult social care practice, England, world-class research. And if I think about whether that research will have an impact, I think there are at least 4 key ingredients, and those are represented in the programme today. One of them is, obviously, high-quality science, high-quality research. Secondly, active involvement of people who use services or carers. Thirdly, excellent engagement with people who deliver services, who commission them, who manage them. And, of course, an imaginative and appropriate knowledge exchange process. So what I want to happen today, and I'm sure you're all committed to this, is that we engage in all of those things and use those things to improve the impact of the research that we do. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to our first plenary speaker. Apologies, slightly late. Chris Whitty, who is Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Health. He's been there since January. He also is Professor of Public and International Health at London School of Hygiene, not very far up the road, and a consultant physician in acute medicine and infectious diseases at University College London Hospitals and Hospital for Tropical Diseases. I think the tropical disease part won't feature hugely in the presentation, but welcome, Chris.
Right. Thank you very much. you know how I make this thing? It's where it should be. Very good. I found it quite scary coming into this hall, not because of all of you. You look very friendly, but the kind of all those portraits of surgeons. I've never been here before. Not a single smile amongst them. They remind me very much of what it was like to be a house officer. So I'm going to talk today relatively straightforwardly, and none of the points I'm making will, I think, be terribly revolutionary to anybody here, or at least I certainly hope not. I need to use that one, apparently. Thank you very much. The first slide is simply to reassure you. I don't come from NIHR, so a lot of people don't know what I do, and they therefore think I don't care what you do. I care passionately what you do. My view is social care research is the area of research that is probably going to have to increase most over the next 2 decades if we're going to face the future problems. And I want to make that really clear. I've listed out, which I'm not going to read out, some of the big numbers involved, but it costs a lot of money, it employs a lot of people, and most importantly, it affects a very large number of people who are vulnerable at whatever stage of adulthood they are. But, and I think it's an important but, we have to accept collectively that the research base in social care is very patchy. There are some areas where it's excellent, there are some areas where it's okay, and there are some areas where it's non-existent. That is the practical reality. And I think that one of the things, and this is the first sort of serious point I wanted to make, is that the social care fields have historically been ones which have been probably under-resourced compared to others. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that we cannot just do in social care research what we can do in the most basic sciences, which is essentially just fund the best and hope the magic will happen and all the problems will be solved. We have to look ahead to the future and say what problems are coming down the tracks that we have to do research to try and improve and head off in the future. That has to be a systematic thing, and therefore social care research has to depend on a very serious forward vision of what health is going to look like and where the gaps will be if we just carry on as usual. Because if we just carry on, certain areas of social care research will pile up and will continue to be very good and will meet the needs of the future, but some areas will be left untouched. So that's my first general point. And the reason I wanted to make that point is I'm hoping to have, across all of NIHR, a series of conversations about what, in different sectors, the future is going to look like. Because I think only once we've got a shared vision of the future that we all share, can we then work out a strategy and tactics for the next 10 years to build on the fantastic first 10 years of NIHR research. Now, the reason why social care research is going to become more important over the next 2 decades is pretty straightforward, and you all know it. It is that our ability to improve longevity through healthcare has not been matched by our ability to reduce numbers of years for people with disabilities. So this is every country in the world from the global burden of disease, with blue being the first part of the 2-decadal system, and red being the second part. The UK is highlighted in bold. And with every single one of them, on average, we are gaining, once you get to developed countries, different in developing countries from developed countries, we're gaining on average 1 year of healthy life for every 2 years of life we're gaining from this point onwards. So therefore, the burden of disability clearly is going to go up. And other aspects of social care, because care on the elderly is clearly only one part of what you do, are not going to go away. Some areas which do give rise to a need for social care in people who previously didn't need it are getting better, and other areas are getting worse. So the next thing we need to do is to think about the kinds of things which are going to medically improve and the kinds of things which medically are not going forward as fast. And I've highlighted, done completely the wrong thing here, highlighted two here. I'm not having much difficulty, I'm not doing well with my slides. The first one is cerebrovascular diseases. So the number of the incidence of stroke and the number of people dying from stroke has gone down substantially over the last decade, along with other cardiovascular diseases. That's a phenomenal achievement on a combination of medical and public health interventions. And stroke clearly is a major cause of disability, but there are 2 serious buts in that. The first but is that as we're chipping away at other diseases, which cause significant frailty and disability to elderly adults, dementia is the one we've highlighted here, are increasing in their relative importance. So therefore, we're going to face quite different future challenges. Some things will look better in the future, but some things clearly will not. And the future challenges we're going to face, and therefore we have to think through, and this is what I'm inviting people to do, are external and internal challenges. So examples of external challenges are things like social and demographic changes, or medical and technological advances. And to some extent, these are predictable. We will get occasional medical advances we're not predicting, but in the broad sweep, these external things are reasonably predictable. And then we're going to have internal challenges, and I'm going to highlight that with the fact that across all of healthcare, but particularly in my view in social care, we have a challenge of doing multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. And yet this is going to be essential if we are to face the problems of the future. And I'm going to illustrate that with synthesis, but I could have illustrated it with a variety of other things. Now, just a quick whip through some demographic points to make a single point, which most of you will know, but some of you will not. When you consider the UK, and England specifically, what you find is that the demography of cities and the demography of the rest of the country are totally different. The difficulty this is going to lead to, and I've illustrated this London and England as a whole in terms of a standard demographic chart. If you look forward to 2037, and that's not that far away, many people in the audience will still be in active working life, the demography of London will look remarkably similar. But the elderly people have got to go somewhere. And what is going to happen is that the non-urban areas of the UK are therefore going to age substantially faster than you would predict just from the overall numbers. So let's illustrate this, for example, in the north of England. This in 2037 is what the ONS projects Newcastle will look like on the right and Northumberland on the left. And if you look at Northumberland, what you'll see is that the majority of people will be of retirement or peri-retirement age or above. Anyone in that bar is over the age of 90. There will be a huge burden of elderly people, much higher than you'd expect if you just look to the north of England as a whole. And if you look at some of the semi-rural areas, we're already reaching a situation where the majority of people are retired. And that is only going to accelerate. So if I compare the period just after I'd qualified, around now, and roughly when I will retire, unless the government chooses to put up the retirement age again, the situation in terms of population of 85 or over changes very dramatically. The point that I want to make with this slider, though, is that the areas which are urban are spared. So the aging of the rest of the population accelerates far faster than you'd predict. It's rather like the picture of Dorian Gray, but without the immorality thrown in, that the population of England is aging to allow the cities to remain young. And that is a serious social problem we're going to have to face. And therefore, age support ratios, in this case the colours are inverted, where dark is good. Again, in 1993, there was a very good age support ratio everywhere in the country. If we look out to 2033, not that long away, we're going to be in a situation where many areas of the country, the age support ratios become extremely difficult. And for delivering social care, that is going to be a substantial challenge. And finally, on this score, it's not just in big brush areas. This, for example, is London. And if you think about stroke care, a very important area, we know that incidence of stroke is going down, mortality from strokes when people have them is going down, but the total number of strokes is going up. That's because of the aging of the population. But the point I want to make with this map is this is the map of strokes in London in terms of stroke survivors. Big social care needs, some of them, not all. And what you see is they're very maldistributed across the city. So almost none here where we are in central London, but very substantial numbers further out. So this maldistribution of need across the country is going to face us, I think, with a very big but entirely predictable social care challenge. So that's an example of an external challenge. And the same could be true, just take a different group, migrant populations, for example, heavily concentrated, in this case, the other way around, concentrated in the urban areas, by and large, On the left are people of African origin, and on the right are people of South Asian origin in terms of their heritage. But then we move on to the wider questions about what are the things that we as scientists have to grapple with. And here I'm going to start with a really obvious point. When does policy or action, which is what all of us care about in the end, in social care have to be multidisciplinary? And the answer is almost all the time. The action has to be multidisciplinary. Very, very few social care problems can be solved with science from a single discipline. A few can, but very few. The difficult question, I think, which I do not think the academic community has settled, and it needs to, is at what stage do the sciences, including the economic and political sciences, I'm using sciences in the broadest possible sense, need to be integrated for policy? Because a policymaker cannot move from one bit of research in a particular discipline to a policy, except under very narrow circumstances. They usually have to integrate sciences from many different areas. And my argument would be, and I think I would challenge anyone to dispute this, the academic community could do this better. Essentially, there are 4 options for integrating the sciences for social care. The first one is to do science in research centres of excellence, accept it will be very rigorous, so each individual bit of it will be rigorous, and then wait for the policymakers to knit it all together when they're doing a policy thing. This, in reality, is how it is mainly done at the moment. And I think half of moment's thought will tell you that is a suboptimal situation. The second thing, much talked about but difficult to do, is integrate science, so do interdisciplinary research, where the same group do research which actually covers multiple disciplines. In reality, very few institutions, including the LSE and all the ones you belong to, actually have the capacity to do all the sciences needed for any complex problem. So interdisciplinary research is wonderful in concept, but really quite difficult to do in practice. The third possibility is deliberately to link studies, and this is where I think the school could play an enormous role, from multiple disciplines, which may be done by different institutions playing to their strengths, linked together in a multidisciplinary patchwork of different studies, each one good and rigorous in its own area, but where the planning for them was planning to put them together at the end. And for the purposes of this, I'm going to call this multidisciplinary research, although the semantics people get extraordinarily excited by, but that's my definition. And the final way we can do it, which is the one I'm just going to do a slight riff on and then take any questions people are interested in, is to integrate unlinked studies through rigorous multidisciplinary synthesis. Now, synthesis, unfortunately, in the UK is the Cinderella science. With the exception of systematic reviews, it gets no recognition in the ref. It doesn't get you an FBA or an FRS. In fact, it often doesn't even get you promotion. And yet this synthesis is the thing which actually makes it possible to turn science that is well done into policy. It's what takes all the different elements and brings them together. The problem we have is that policy is fast. And the options for incorporating it into science are therefore, once a policy movement starts, and Lynn, who's doing the next talk, has a lot of battle scars from this, your choice is, if you want to integrate the research evidence, you ignore the science, because it's inconvenient, very easy to do. You Google a few things, footnote, and decide what you're going to do, Google a bit to find a bit of evidence to back it up, stick in a few references and call that research. That's, of course, lying with footnotes, but there's a lot of that is done as well. You can phone a friend. You can say, that nice Professor Knapp, he knows a thing or two, and you phone someone who may or may not be an expert in the area, or you can do proper synthesis in advance. Fairly obviously, the last of those is the only serious one that is going to bring together all the sciences rigorously. And I should be clear that when I say synthesis, I don't mean systematic reviews, although they're an important tool, but they're very much a subset of the kinds of synthesis we could do. Multidisciplinary synthesis is in its infancy, and outside systematic reviews, we have to be honest, for non-quantitative studies in particular, the methodologies for synthesis are contested. And if you put a group of methodologists together, you can spend 2 or 3 delightful days, at the end of which you don't come up with a consensus. That needs to change, I think. Once you start trying to integrate sciences between them, so you're, for example, integrating qualitative and quantitative sciences, or maybe integrating epidemiology and economics, it gets a lot worse. People tend to say their discipline is better, and you get some extraordinary results. And I've been at the receiving end of those as a chief scientific advisor many times. And yet the reality is that multidisciplinary synthesis may be difficult, but is a lot easier than doing interdisciplinary research. And in reality, it's the only way that we can integrate past research into current policy things, because it wasn't previously done as multidisciplinary research. So unless we want to start to go to year zero and ignore all the previous research, this is the only way we're going to be able to integrate stuff from the very large sweep of social research, which should be helping to inform us. So those are just two examples, and there are many others. I'm just illustrating the fact that we need to think seriously about the external challenges we're going to face in the 20 to 30 year time frame, because that's really what we should be thinking about, and the internal challenges as academics we have to face in terms of improving our methodologies so that they're fit to do the kinds of things that we all know they need to do. So just to finish up on a few general points about NIHR. I am clear that the relative importance of well-targeted, rigorous social care research, which has an impact, each one of those has got to be true, has only one direction in terms of its importance, and that is up. I'm very clear about that. Not all research labelled as social research is both methodologically strong, actually rigorous enough to pay any attention to, and strategic, i.e. it's answering an important problem. And I regret to say some of it is neither. Clearly some is both. The very large numbers in terms of unmet needs from people with social care needs, and the very large numbers in terms of cost, which are only going to go up, mean that even small gains are worthwhile. If you're talking about £1 billion, then a 3% change is actually a really useful gain to get. And most serious change tends to be incremental and build on previous changes. We need to be systematic about identifying probable or future trends and scientific weaknesses, both in the external space and the internal space. And I really do hope all of you would want to join us in a conversation and a final decision about that. And of course, and this is a point that is very difficult when you're dealing with policymakers, all policymakers want you to have answered the question they're interested in now, to which the answer is, you should have asked me 3 years ago, or however long the search is going to do. It is important that we encourage people to think about when research is going to land, rather than what we want now. And that is why future looks are so essential. Because if you can predict the future with a moderate degree of certainty, there's always confidence intervals around that, you'll be much better at doing the kinds of research which are going to have genuine impact on the people who we try to serve, which is those with social care needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Right, we've got lots of time for questions and comments. So there are microphones, I think. And before you ask a question, just identify who you are. That will be helpful. So please, over to you. Comments or questions? So.
And feel free to ask questions on things I haven't talked about. That was just to start a discussion.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for that illuminating presentation. I enjoyed it very much and found it stimulating. I'm Justine Schneider from the University of Nottingham. I'm sitting here with some assumptions about the disciplines that you're referring to, but I think it would be helpful if you could be explicit about the disciplines that you're thinking about.
Well, I mean, the list is actually extremely long in terms of disciplines. Clearly, they're the ones that people immediately think about, so things like epidemiology, anthropology, economics. But there are also many disciplines like nursing, physiotherapy, which have not played their full part, I think, in this, and actually got a huge amount to teach us. And we should be drawing in from other disciplines. For example, people involved in education have thought about people who have challenging environments in a very different way to the way people in health have. And I think what anybody who looks at the history of science knows is that pulling people from external disciplines in often leads to the quickest advances. New to the world ideas are relatively rare. New to a particular discipline, because someone crosses a disciplinary boundary, are actually quite common. So I think we should be as Catholic as possible in actually pulling in people from as many disciplines as we can.
Okay. Okay.
Hello.
Well, microphone's coming. Yep.
Now you may be able to. Hi, I'm Valerie Lipman. I'm an intern at Social Care Workforce Research Unit. I've been involved over about nearly 30 years, I should think, in doing work and research concerning black and minority ethnic elders. And there's been, and research continues. It's the same sort of research, and the results seem to be the same. So I'm wondering actually how one then converts it into policy that makes a difference and affects that group of people, or in similar situations.
Well, firstly, if I can do a quick plug for a paper I wrote saying how do you get research into health policy just before Christmas. It gives you a long answer to that, which I won't use up my remaining 10 minutes on that. But the short version is there are two keys to doing it. The first of which is to start with what decisions do they need to take? And very often researchers don't start with that fundamental question of actually what can a policymaker do? And their range of things they can do is relatively limited. If the research does not inform usable policy decisions, clearly it's not going to go terribly far. But assuming that your research is, which I'm sure it is, very well founded and very well thought through in terms of the policy, a lot of it is then working out, is the reason it's not getting through because the policy cycle hasn't reached that point? And I think one of the things that's interesting being inside the policy machine is that what happens is certain issues suddenly get momentum. Sometimes it's because a minister comes in with a particular interest, sometimes it's because of external things like the academic community. And at that moment, all the research in that area suddenly gets taken up, and then there's a very long period afterwards. And so the second thing is to try and look for, is the reason it's not getting through because this wave has not gone through? And if so, and if there are things that need to be done, try to find the people who can help to get a wave going in this particular area of work. Because policy doesn't move incrementally, it moves in steps. And it's when the steps occur that the research tends to be taken up.
Okay, Yvonne, I think there was so.
Hello, my name's Yvonne Burks from the University of York. NIHR's made huge strides in getting practice to engage with research and making in health. I'm just wondering what plans you have for that to be extended more into social care, say beyond something like care homes and much more into local authorities.
Well, it's very clear that if we want to get practice to extend, and it's not just in social care, in public health and many other areas, if we don't engage with local authorities, we're missing the main agents of potential change in England. So we have to do that. I'm very open, basically, to anybody saying, writing to me or writing to my colleagues or meeting up with us to say, these are things we could do. I recognise the problem. What I'd like is people to provide me with some achievable solutions, because that it should be done is blindingly obvious, and it does clearly need to happen. And being a London-centred organisation, there is a risk that we fail to spot, although we are very lucky that because quite large areas of NIHR are scattered in different bits of the country which are very strong, we do have reach into most areas. Nevertheless, I and my immediate colleagues are London-based, and I think we often may miss something that would be really obvious to people who are working in other parts of the country.
Okay, Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Manthorpe from King's College London Social Care Workforce Research Unit. It's a while since I've heard people refer to the burden of the elderly. Probably I'm getting older and people don't dare say it to me, but I'm surprised, and I think it reflects a sort of fundamental problem at the heart of NIHR if it sees the elderly as a burden. We wouldn't say that about disabled people, we wouldn't say that about any other group in society, and social care is the first to recognise that the majority of people providing social care to other people are older people themselves. So it's really a plea to reframe that discourse in sort of sociology speak, because if we continue to refer to the burden of the elderly, we won't get very much further.
I'm duly chastised for using the term. My point was this is actually something we really need to take very seriously. And I think it's very important that we also don't attack one another too much when we're actually all trying to do the same thing.
Okay, question here, comment here. It's the mic. It's coming from this side. Microphone's coming.
Hi, Thalia, from Asia Care Group. I wonder if we're being international enough in our research and our endeavours to improve care. I'm thinking about the countries like Japan and so forth, where they're ageing twice as fast as that of the UK, and some really interesting work being done on how we, proactively manage. Are we being international enough? Are we learning enough from other countries?
I mean, my background's in international health, so my short answer would be I do not think we are at all. And it's not just in care of the elderly, it's in many, many other areas. However, we also have to remember that NIHR is there to support the health of England and the UK more widely. But I think we could do a lot, actually, to learn from other countries, because the way in which people approach social care is much more different than the way in which they, for example, approach many clinical problems, which are recognisably similar across all other areas. So I think there probably is a lot more to learn in this area from international than maybe in some others.
Okay, I've got one question there, up the back there. Keep your hand up, keep waving.
I'm Julian Forder from the University of Kent. You make a very persuasive argument about evidence synthesis, but I think you yourself picked up that that's not always, doesn't always sit well with academic promotion. I wondered if you can give us some of your views on how you might square that particular circle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a problem for the academic community as a whole to sort out. Government can't sort this one out. This is to do with academic prestige, and it's basically to do with academic snobbery, in my view, because very clearly this is an area which is absolutely fundamental to making policy evidence-based. So I think we can do things mechanistically. For example, we can do things like get REF to start recognising it in their returns, and one of the things I'm hoping to discuss with them is that possibility. But I think people have to, in their universities, in the funding panels they sit in all the various things that academia does to support itself, we've got to make this point continuously. If you are serious about getting research into policy or research into practice, synthesis is a necessary step. And so we've got to make that point. We've got to win this argument.
Perhaps I can just chip in with what's happened here at LSE. So we had a change in remuneration and career structure for teaching staff academics. That was followed by a change for research staff. And there's now a discussion about introducing a sort of another track called impact fellowships. And it's people who were previously or currently funded as researchers, but their main activity is synthesis of the kind that you're describing. And the concern is that they do get left behind when there are promotions and other things being considered. It still doesn't mean, however, that people in the teaching side and the research side will be rewarded for systematic reviews and other synthesis activities, but at least that discussion is now beginning to happen. So I think that it is within universities it needs to happen, but I think also leadership from NIHR would help to reinforce that message. Okay, we've got time for one more quick question or comment. Okay, Bryony here. Yeah, pass it along, please.
Thank you for that presentation. My name is Bronnie Beresford from the University of York. When you were speaking, the emphasis seemed to be very much about policy influence and informing policy, and I just wondered what you see the role of the School for Social Care Research in terms of informing service design and delivery and practice.
I was only using illustrations, and I totally agree with you that I would, in a sense, practice to policy is simply a continuum. Policy is a very small part of the right audience for people in the School for Social Care Research. As a practitioner myself, I clearly rely on the research of others, as everybody who's a practitioner does.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. Thank you very much indeed, Chris.
Pleasure.
Okay, and I will be reminded by my colleagues I forgot to congratulate NIHR on its 10th birthday, which I was going to do in my introductory comments, so it is the 10 years of NIHR. So I'm going to hand over now to Lynn Romeo, who is Chief Social Worker for Adults in England. She's been in that role since 2013. She was previously Assistant Director for Adult Social Care in Camden and worked for many years in the Social Service Inspectorate and as a field social worker. So over to you, Lynn.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. Is that right? Yes. Great. The title of my little presentation, I'm not a researcher or an academic, so it'll be quite a different presentation, but does social work work, actually? And when it came back, it said, oh, delete repeated word, and I thought, yes, it's really interesting, actually. What is social work? And we call a lot of it now social care. It used to always be called social work when I was young, and certainly in Scotland, they still refer to it as social work, and it covers the whole gamut of what professionally qualified social workers do, but also what lots of other people are doing, and a lot of the provision, which we now particularly think of as social care, so nursing homes, residential homes, home care support, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a really interesting question, what is social care and what does the School for Social Care research focus on? And there has been mainly a focus on the provision and the outputs and the sorts of support that people get. So I'm particularly interested in social work itself, the professional social work practice, what social workers do, and how we can really understand whether it makes a difference. And this picture made me think of that old joke. I know it applies to a lot of other professions as well, the old joke about, well, how many social workers does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer to that has changed since I've been in social work. And I'll tell you the answer at the end to today's joke, if I can remember to do that. So the questions for me in my role are, well, what difference do social workers make? Which specific social work methods are most effective? Can we really demonstrate that what I believe is the unique combination of the ability to build relationships, empathize, value diversity, really respect people's difference, support and get alongside people to identify the differences or the solutions that really matter to them so that they can live their lives in the way that's best for them. To be that conduit between the state and the individual and the family, and to work with risk and conflict as well as balancing care with protection and promoting independence when necessary. Do we really know that that is a unique contribution and that that unique combination makes a big difference? So what do we know so far? Well, my colleagues, Jill Manthorpe and Joe Moriarty at the School for the Social Care Research Workforce Research Unit did a review recently, which was published in March. And what they found out through that was that we know that the evidence base is mixed for social work with adults and uneven, but broadly positive. That their effectiveness does rely on this ability to combine a number of roles, including assessment work, having local knowledge of communities, being able to provide that ongoing counselling, relational support to people, and to undertake very effective case coordination. So it's not surprising often when you look at integrated mental health services that one of the things that people love about the social workers in there is that they're very good case coordinators, but sometimes they get too narrowed down to just doing case coordination. We also know that where we're really getting alongside of individuals and we're really asking right from the start, having that different conversation about what matters to you and how can I work alongside you to get the outcome you want, where they're treated as individuals who can be involved as equals in that journey, that gets a lot more positive feedback from people. And one piece of research specifically around that is the Making Safeguarding Personal evaluation. So we know that the kind of core practice of social work, which has been around for the last 30, 40 years, is seen as very positive by the people who use social work services. So people do report that they get better experience when their service is connected and aligned, when pathways are fluid and support is integrated. So we know the call for integration is a good one, but do we understand integration in that way? Or do we get hooked into structures and where money is and who manages whom, and we're not thinking about how does the person who's in that pathway experience that integrated response? So I guess Chris's point about synthesis applies here. So the other big thing for me, and I go around the countryside speaking to a lot of social workers and local authorities, is what models of approaches in social work support and intervention do you use, and how do you know they're the best ones? And often they can't tell me, and they've forgotten to know how to describe or name what they do. So there's something about how do we get back to that? So what are we asking of research in terms of trying to find the answer to that? And where else might the answers be? But what do we need to know in order to do our jobs really effectively? And how, importantly, can the jobs we give people, or the job profiles, or the expectations we have of people reflect better what we know? There's lots that we don't know, and Jill and Joe's research review highlighted that. And we certainly, I was surprised at this, that in terms of approaches and methods and interventions in working with adults with learning disabilities and their carers, there's very little out there. And I wonder if that's partly to do with often services are provided through integrated arrangements and teams, and there tends to be a focus on the process and the outcome, and not thinking about what are the contributions that the multidisciplinary team make, and what's the added value or the additionality that particular approaches might contribute. We certainly need to know a lot more about the interrelationship between the structural arrangements, workload pressures, satisfaction and effectiveness, so that we can create the right conditions for great social work practice. And interestingly, last week I was in Holland visiting the Buurtzorg organisation, where they have completely reframed how services should be professionally and practice-led. The teams are self-managing groups of 8 to 10 nurses. They decide, from a professional perspective, how to best support the patients and the carers in the community that they're supporting, and they will do whatever is necessary. It's a bit like their old total football approach from the Dutch team. It's the same with their approach to community nursing. So when I went around with the nurse each day, she would sit there and have a conversation, have a cup of tea. She would make the toast and spread the jam on it. She would also shower the person and deal with their ulcerated leg. So there was something about getting back to a more holistic way of working with people. And the thing that came across to me so clearly was that all of those people were positive. They felt really well looked after. They were motivated to continue to try and self-manage their own conditions. They valued that knowledge and understanding that those nurses had, and that each day there would be that continuity and connection with them. So it really does make a difference, but it's never been, we've never been able to see it in cashable terms, have we? But one of the things they've been able to achieve is a 30% reduction in the amount of money that the government is spending on their health care. So there is something there about getting back to let's be practice-led. There's a lot about strengths-based approaches now in social care and social work. It's very, very popular, but do we have any strong evidence that it actually is more effective and better? I've been to a number of places where they've been using attachment theory and relationship-based practice, particularly with adults with learning disabilities and their families. I'm sure that could inform a lot more work with social work and social care with adults, but we just don't have the evidence base to use that. And integration, of course, that's the big game in town now, and does it really deliver better cost effectiveness? So plenty we don't know. Longitudinal studies would help. I know RCTs have been much more used in health, not so much in social care. They can give you some answers about what works, and also better cost data would also help us to assess cost effectiveness. But it's not just simply a case of, as Chris said, publishing papers and then everybody will go off and do the right thing. I think it's really hard to get the evidence into practice, actually, and I think this diagram sort of represents the complexity of it. And passive dissemination has never worked, particularly with social workers. They're useless at just kind of being told, oh, this is the evidence base, go off and integrate it. So there are a number of critical levers which we need to get the research utilised, and the kind of middle section of that really highlights what we need to do. The whole stakeholder engagement, people being much more collaborative, involving people with lived experience and service users and their families as part of your research project, as equal partners, not being researched into, but that actually they're alongside of you doing with it. And the same with practitioners. It's a complex journey. It asks something of all of us. But I also think it's wrong to say that there is no evidence in social care. It's just that maybe it looks a bit different to what we're used to. And Sky did this review in 2003 about the types of knowledge we have, and I won't run through them all, but they're all there, and I think how we bring them together so that we have a rich, cohesive approach to what do we know about what works, and how do we make sure we can build that into our policy making, our practice, our practice and our application of practice is really important. But for me, one of the key things there around the uniqueness in terms of social work and social care is the lived experience of people, and what they have experienced and what they know makes a difference. And I think we've tended to look at outputs too much and not about what have been the outcomes for people. So horses for courses, I think. I know that, I get the feeling, and I might be wrong about this, that there tends to be more of a quantitative approach to a lot of the research that happens, particularly in the context of very good evidence-based scientific type research, whereas in social care we tend to kind of look more towards the experiential qualitative side. But it does give you two sides of the question, doesn't it? So these are some examples. So cognitive behavioural therapy, is it better at addressing depression compared to something else? There's a lot of evidence that it is. But then qualitatively, how do people with depression feel about engaging with this sort of therapy? What makes it easier to do so? And I was visiting a mental health trust a few months ago, and one of the issues they had is that a lot of people that were identified as potentially suitable to benefit from this were not engaging or going through the whole process. And when they kind of unpacked it a bit, they realized a lot of people had anxieties about their rent, about their housing situation, about the fact that their relationship with one of their family members was really difficult. So they brought a social worker in to do some work around some of those social factors that were barriers to the person perhaps engaging with the cognitive behavioural therapy effectively, and it made a big difference. So it's those kind of questions, I think, that we need to get the balance between, particularly if we really are going to demonstrate how social care and social work can make a real difference. And of course, there are lots of push and pull factors, and that can often distort what people use. And you'll be aware that in social work and social care, a lot of the push factors are these incredibly, scrutiny of decisions, courts, inspections, performance assessment, media, and that's particularly the case on the children's social care side. You only need to have one child death, and you've got all this scrutiny going on about, well, what are they doing and why didn't they use the evidence and all the rest of it. And then that tends to drive the way in which policy informs what people need to do. Where government and everybody wants to tackle enduring problems. So, of course, that is the way in which, well, what's the policy or what's the evidence about how we might better do this? But sometimes it isn't there. So recently, I've been trying to promote the idea of a named social worker for people with learning disabilities. Well, what's your evidence? Well, actually, I don't have anything. But how do you start doing something and getting the evidence unless you take a punt and have a go? So how do we get that right? How do we do the prototyping? Let's have a learning laboratory. Let's try something out. And as we learn more about it, adapt and change it. How does that fit into the research landscape? I think the integrating working with disciplines and other professions is really important, actually. And I think that is one of the things that is a key area. And for those of you who are looking for something to research, I think for me that's going to be a key thing that I need to know the answer to in some way. When I visit integrated teams, being able to make the business case for enhancing the social work or social care input in those services is really key, particularly when you have the challenge of investment in those professional backgrounds coming from different places, different employers often, tensions between how much money a local authority may have to invest in a service and how much the health organisation may have. How do you get a kind of joint approach to how does integrated multidisciplinary work well, and if we need to enhance the social work and social care element of it, what's the evidence base for that, and how do we jointly decide to do that? People will only start to do those things when we've got a really strong evidence base to say it makes the difference that it makes. And I was with some GPs a few weeks ago talking about what I believe the contribution is that social workers could make to improving primary care. But they need more evidence from me that it does really make a difference. It will reduce the pressure on them. It will give their primary care practice a much more holistic understanding of their patients and carers, and support patients and carers to be more self-managing and becoming less to the surgery and less admissions to hospital. So it's really complicated, isn't it? And I think having worked with commissioners and decommissioning as well, often that requires a really solid understanding of what is it we need, have we got the right thing, how do we decommission this because it's not delivering what it should be, and how you involve people who use services and their carers in that commissioning and design and decommissioning and monitoring of contracts has been a challenge. I think there has been some movement in that field in local authorities. I'm not sure how much we've been able to do that in the integrated arrangements we have. In terms of motivating practitioners, obviously it's a pull factor now. Social workers are required to have continuing professional development as nurses and occupational therapists do now, so they've got to demonstrate research-mindedness and that they're keeping up to date. It helps to be more transparent about why you're doing what you're doing. Social workers often operate behind closed doors. They're the only individual in there with the family. Nobody's watching them. So how do they demonstrate to the person they're working with? The reason I'm using this approach with you is because of this, and this is what we think the difference can make. People, patients, families, they're actually quite interested in knowing what works and what might be the best way to work with them. And we only have to see sometimes what happens when people understand that certain drugs might be better at treating something and they're not getting access to it. Well, it's the same. I think we need to get into that space with social work and social care. So I think it would really help me and help others in the local authorities as well, or in social care organisations, if we had better evidence so we can make the case for greater investment, and it helps us to keep safe in our practice as well. And the values and motivation are really, really important. Everybody wants to do the best possible job. They want to make the best possible difference. And so they really want to know, well, what would be a better approach for me to take, or what is the evidence about how I should work with somebody? So I don't think practitioners are resistant, actually, to evidence and using evidence and research, because they do really want to do that. It's how we get that information to them in a kind of palatable and easy to digest way. And I'll do a plug here for the Social Care Elf, which I think has been really helping, and I think those kind of nuggets of research and being able to distribute that quickly to people is really making a difference. So what are the things that stop people using evidence? Well, I think policy and politics is right. I think Chris's point earlier is I've seen things happen where there isn't an evidence base, and in fact it contradicts it, but there's a political incentive to do certain things, and so that happens and everybody gets a bit downhearted. But we've got to be resilient and keep going back to the table and saying, well, actually, the evidence doesn't support that, and we need to think about how we might change the politics. Employers, I think employers need to be really good at providing leadership to create a culture of learning, a culture of research and evidence. And if you don't have people at the top modelling that and creating that, then it's very, very difficult for practitioners at the front line to do it. I think in training and in qualifying programs, we need a much more robust focus on using research and evidence and building practitioners as researchers and contributing to research. And finally, I think the most important thing is how do we involve people who use services, people with lived-in experience and carers in that journey as well. And there's been a lot of progress on involving people with lived experience and their carers in educating social workers, but also in having much more engagement in fieldwork practice with people helping to design and change services so that they do better respond to the things that matter to them. So, as I said, the motivators are leadership, creating the right culture, really giving people support to understand and use the evidence, and commitment in people using services as well. So I'll finish by saying I think it's everybody's business, actually. I think partly as academics, designing research studies and practice inquiries which address all these things, but also making it accessible. I think it's really hard. There are a number of journals, and sometimes I distribute them through my Twitter or through my networks. And I then say, oh, did you read that piece of it? And people say, oh, it's too academic, didn't really understand it. So Social Care Elf is a really good example of how you make it digestible and understandable. Most practitioners are very busy, so we've got to find a way of making it easy to understand so that they can really get it and want to use it. Again, I think leadership and organisational support are critical to the use of evidence. Employees are key, and I think there's something about how we educate and role model people at the top of organisations who are often very busy doing their performance management, saving money and all the rest of it. But social workers will say, and social care practitioners as well, and OTs and everybody, actually OTs are a lot better at it than social workers because I think they've had a long history of being researchers and contributing to it. So we've got a lot to learn from them. But they really do need the support and encouragement to use it, but also take responsibility for wanting to be part of it and to think about when they go out and meet people and they're reflecting on what they've done, capturing how they change their practice in response to what the people they were working with were saying. So how do we create the systems that can support them to do that? And as I said, people who use services themselves must be involved in co-producing that evidence, and it matters to them. And again, I think the policy and practice and what we get around valuing and acknowledging evidence is really, really important. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions. But getting back to my first slide, does anybody know the answer? How many social workers does it take to change a light bulb? No? Depends whether the light bulb wants to change. Well, the modern 21st century answer is it doesn't take any social workers because they've all been empowered to change themselves. So thanks very much. So if you've got any questions, I mean, Chris and I have had lots of discussions about how do we get that focus on social work and social care, and how do I keep arguing for my post to continue to exist, because if there's no evidence that actually social workers make any difference, there's not a lot of evidence for having a chief social worker.
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Lynn. Let's take time for some questions, then we'll congratulate Lynn afterwards. So quickly.
Hello, my name is...
Go on. I think so.
my name's Janet Fevrier. I'm come from actually the voluntary sector. I've worked in social care and I've worked in health, and now I run a small charity called Crossroads, who provide respite breaks for carers. My sort of question is that when we're looking at integration, now that more and more health and social care services are being commissioned to the voluntary sector, I would see us as quite an integral part of that integration. And I just wondered how we can be more involved in assisting with the research, because sometimes social workers are so busy, as we know, we're called to help provide them with information because we're there on site. So it's about using us and working with us as well as part of that partnership.
Yes, no, I agree totally. I think that's the context in which social care and health exists now, isn't it? It's got to be, as Chris said earlier, there's no one bit that can be the answer. It's got to be a multidisciplinary integrated response, and as part of evaluating and contributing to that, the community and voluntary sector are key. So I think locally, if organisations are trying to think about what's the best way to support and help people and how can we get the best outcomes, there must be a collaboration locally. I think we need to think maybe through the School of Social Care Research how we can make sure that contribution is included and recognised. So maybe Martin and I can have a chat about that later, about how we might frame that.
Okay, thank you. Comments, other comments or questions? At the back there. Okay.
Hi there. My name is Patrick Worthington. I'm an interim manager. Lynn, something I've seen that does seem to work in terms of articulating the social work voice and perspective is reflective sessions. And I think, again, it adds to your point about leadership, because social workers tend to do the habitual in a very pressured environment. They're looking to sort of to make sure they deliver on performance targets. And it takes creative and thoughtful management to actually create the space and time for social workers to think, what am I doing, how am I engaging, to basically reflect on their casework and to assert the skills that they've worked hard to get. And I just wondered, from your perspective, what are you trying to do to give us the time and the permission in local settings to actually do that?
Yes, no, I think that's really important, actually, reflective practice and opportunities for people to get together and either as peer support, peer reflective practice sessions, think about the work they're doing and how they might change it, or what other people can contribute to thinking about that. I think there's been a kind of traditional emphasis on the one-to-one supervisory relationship in social work, and it's become more and more managerial over time, particularly with the whole performance management structure. So I think there's something about how do we create that kind of learning culture and space for people to do that, And there are lots of different models now that are emerging. In some places, practitioners with support of principal social workers, actually, who are key to trying to focus back on practice and give people that opportunity and time to do that. They've set up regular communities of practice or peer supervision or reflective practice sessions, what other different names you want to give to them, and have created the culture that says it's okay to do that. You don't have to be running around busy every minute of the day, rushing around doing these things, because actually if you take the time out, it's an invest to save thing, as well as your own sanity and ability to think about your own work and reflect on it. It also probably ends up with you doing more effective practice later on. So I think we've certainly, through the employer standards, tried to push that every organisation employing social workers should make that space for people to have manageable workloads, time for good reflective supervision, but also we're starting to try and model reflective practice and communities of practice. And one thing I'm really interested in is how that reflective practice and supervision model starts to incorporate people who use services and carers of people who use services. So they are part of that reflection and they're part of shaping modern day social work practice. So I know it's really difficult because I know people are really stretched and there aren't enough people and there's a lot of work, but I think we need to think differently about how we manage that because otherwise we're constantly just chasing our tails.
Okay, I think I want to thank Lynn for her presentation. So thank you very much indeed, Lynn. Excellent. And I just wanted to say a few words to finish. I'm working at 2 time zones. Royal College of Surgeons is 58 minutes behind the rest of us. So if you're chairing a session, beware of the clock change. What we've had is 2 very excellent presentations, 2 very stimulating presentations. And I've just picked out 7 areas of kind of food for thought, or things please, I think, from Chris and from Lynn. One of them is, and as we heard from Lynn just now, lots and lots of unanswered research questions, things which people in the field need answers to help to guide them to improve social care practice. And of course, that would also feed into discussions of social care policy. Number 2 would be unresolved methodological issues. Lots of things that we haven't yet addressed properly, which are particularly pertinent in the social care field. Number 3, poorly integrated research approaches and evidence. We don't bring things together in the way that we could. And linked to that, Chris's point, particularly about unfulfilled multidisciplinary opportunities. And I think that's something we definitely should, well, all of these things we definitely should take on board. Number 5, underdeveloped synthesis and communication, which has been a theme for a long time. I'm sure will continue to be a theme for a long time, but we do need to keep improving our ability to bring things together and to communicate what we find. Number 6, under-involvement of managers, the people who use services and carers in research. I think we do a very good job in social care research in that engagement, on that involvement. We could still do a lot better, and we need to continue to move down that track. And then number 7 will be underprepared practitioners or underaware practitioners. How do we help them to be aware of our research and its relevance to what they do in their daily work? So that's just 7 that I pulled out. Hopefully those are helpful to you as you go through the rest of the day. So to finish, dead on time. Timings are very tight today. You've got 15 minutes break now. Please try to get to sessions on time. It's fairer on the speakers. They then get time to give you their presentations, have discussion. But please use the lunch break and the breaks to engage one with another. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you.